hosting this webinar, and my name is Nurdan Kuban. I teach architectural conservation at Kocaeli University in Turkey. I'm a board member of ICOMOS-Turkish National Committee and the new Secretary General of ICOMOS-CIF International Training Committee. Regarding the field of education, training, and capacity building on cultural heritage, some months ago at one of the board meetings of ICOMOS-Turkey, we agreed that deriving from the April 18th theme of this year, shared cultures, shared heritage, shared responsibility, it has become a globally shared responsibility to consider how the training processes can be sustained during the pandemic and what strategies can be developed for possible future crisis and disaster situations. Therefore, we moved the issue to the international level and asked for the collaboration of ICOMOS International Training Committee. Thankfully, we received their support, and with the leadership of the former and the recent CIF Bureau, and especially Cristina Gonzalez Longo, who is the current president of CIF and the focal point of this event, we came up with these two webinars on capacity building in conservation. Within the presentations and the discussion session of the first webinar, experiences of conservation education during the COVID-19 pandemic were introduced, and problems were addressed, especially about implementing laboratory and site-based courses. For the past semester, some of us had the advantage of having completed the site works prior to the lockdown. However, for the coming semester, we will have to cope with the problem all from the beginning. Therefore, within this second webinar, we wish to discuss the positive and negative aspects of the circumstances based on some questions. Is there a replacement for site experience? Can new technologies be utilized for assisting conservation education? Can new technologies be adjusted and calibrated to correspond to the authenticity of heritage and the spirit of place? Can the education paradigm be revised and improved for prioritizing collaborations at international, regional, and local levels? And of course, new expansions for the preservation of cultural heritage. And finally, can capacity building activities be utilized as a tool for recovery from the global crisis? At this point, I would like to especially emphasize that we definitely all believe in the essential importance of site experience. It is an indispensable component of conservation education. Our objective is not to question the power of place. This webinar solely aims to take the opportunity of reconsidering conservation education and evaluating new expansions in our perspectives under the current circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. I wish to thank our distinguished speakers from ICOMOS-Ireland and ICOMOS-Israel, Paul McMahon, hopefully he will be with us soon, Maurice Murphy, Grainne, Shaffrey, and Amnon Baror. I will introduce each one right before their presentations. We will start the presentations, but just a small reminder, I would like to ask the audience to please turn off their cameras and microphones during the presentations. And also another point, please write your questions in the chat box during the presentations. We will collect the questions and discuss them at the very end of the webinar. And also please specify which speaker you're directing your question to. Is Paul around, or shall we start with Maurice?
Yeah, I think it's better. Maurice.
I think we can start with the...
Christina, did you reach him? Yeah.
Hasn't replied to the email I sent him, but I'll keep trying. And I'm going to actually try to send him another link, so don't worry, just go ahead with Maurice, and I think
then
we'll leave Paul for the last.
Okay, then we're starting with the presentation by Maurice Murphy. He is a chartered building engineer who has worked for over 30 years in research and teaching in the areas of digital surveying and engineering for architectural heritage and archaeology. Dr. Murphy is a member of ICOMOS-Ireland and is currently the director of the Virtual Building Lab, focusing on the areas of virtual reality, historic building information modeling, the application of game engine platforms for the built environment, 3D surveying, and mapping. Maurice, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Nurdan. So I'm going to share my screen with... Okay. Has that come up, Nurdan?
Yes, it has.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation to speak. What I'm going to do is try and answer partially the question, is there a replacement for site experience? And the way I'll present that is, it'll be based on a series of case studies, the projects that we've been working on for virtual recording virtual heritage, and try to express those as for the possibility, could these become learning environments? Because when we carried out the projects, they were for a different purpose. So just to mention my other colleagues, Emer Meegan, who's an archaeologist, specializes in virtual and digital heritage. And then Anthony and Robert are from the Discovery Program. Discovery Program in Ireland is responsible for new technology and archaeology and architectural heritage. So this is just a sort of overview of the process. We usually start with a digital data capture, and that's nowadays it's all remote sensing. It can be laser scanning, terrestrial, aerial, etc., or photogrammetry, structure from motion, etc. Now that data, while it's useful, it really contains information like texture, color, and geometry. So it's necessary to process and organize this data. And then finally, what we attempt to do is attach information, knowledge to the 3D geometry, texture, etc. So what actually happens is that, say, a point cloud from laser scanning doesn't have any intelligence. So we add the intelligence through using systems like GIS, historic BIM, etc., and of course game engines. So I'll just take you through that process now. So the first question is what are the learning requirements for users? So we've broken it down into three types of users: the public, building professionals, researchers in education. So you can see there that they have different use. So their experience, for example, the public is interested in education, in interaction with 3D objects. Building professionals usually want access to the data as well as higher level interaction. So access to the data could mean access to the point cloud or the historic BIM models. And then researchers, probably a mix of both education and conservation specialists. So, okay, and then just breaking it down by profession. Well, like the problem in this area is that we all specialize. I specialize in the modeling end, whereas, geosurveyors, etc., will specialize in data collection. So this chart sort of takes us through everybody's, the applications that people are involved with. So you've data collection, that's usually the surveyor, data processing, data organization, usually surveyor, and then it moves on to the building specialist, and it's overseen by the conservation architect, of course. So people need to have, a broad view of all of the technologies and tools which are used, but they'll also need then to specialize in the particular area that they're working in. So this means that, you need to pick out whatever area you want to, that you have skills in and you want to work in, and probably, this is the area you'll concentrate on. So the whole of the, the presentation here, it's not going to be aimed at everybody, but you'll either have an understanding or higher levels of skills. And just to say, like, while it's all virtual work, we're working with real students here, and so most of our work is based around projects, European-based projects or locally funded heritage projects from national monuments here in Ireland, and then also our links with Carleton University in Ottawa, where they have scanned and created a large model of the Parliament in Ottawa. So just to give you Simona there, PhD student who's now finished, is Dr. Simona Scandor, spent time with us through a cost program, and Karim spent time then through the funding from the Canadian government. So, and many students have passed through. So that's just the project, the size of the project and the scale of the project of Ottawa Parliament. So you can see it's probably one of the largest projects of scant BIM or historic BIM globally, I would think. So just more examples of their works. So this is sort of the aspect of technology transfer between different partner countries is very important, and it doesn't only concern, say, projects within the European Union. And just to sort of closer to home for you, Nurdan, this is one of the students, Gamze, who spent some time working with us, came over into Dublin. I think this is from her PhD, so it's some architecture from Turkey. So I think Gamze is working in the Netherlands now, so that's a few years ago. So you can see, there's, if you look at the Italy and Spain, there's a huge amount of projects all around historic BIM or scanning, etc. A lot of them being PhDs and postdocs. So just starting with what I was saying, this model of data capture, processing, and then the organization of the models so that they become intelligent sites, parts of sites, objects, etc. So data capture, everybody is familiar nowadays with time of flight laser scanning, and so it's probably the most accurate, but it's the most difficult to work with. So here's just some of the projects in Ireland, all terrestrial laser scanning, and carried out by the Discovery Programme. So structured light then for, and I'll just show this later, structured light for high resolution objects. This is the capitals from forecourts buildings. It's classical architecture, which was destroyed in the Civil War here in Ireland and has been repaired and replaced at the moment. So you'll see the difference between terrestrial scanning and then this high resolution scanning and photogrammetry, how the objects will be used. So this is more for everybody to use. It's the sort of revolution in digital photogrammetry or structure from motion. The thing that makes this one easy is that you just need a good SLR camera, and you upload your images taken at in a certain context and from certain angles of an object, and you can then get your 3D object, which is processed on online by various different types of software. So very accessible, but again, when you get the 3D model, there's the sort of skills and how to use that. I'll talk about that. So of course, what's very popular now is UAVs and photogrammetry. So sort of replacing in some circumstances aerial scanning, and of course it's much cheaper, lower cost, and the product, while you have to be careful with the geometry, etc., it can be as accurate as terrestrial scanning and laser aerial scanning. So this is from the scan of the city, of Dublin City. So the historic part of the city was scanned. I'll just show this video quickly if it comes up. And you can see, so this was carried about 4 years ago. It was funded by the ERC and by local funding. So you can see it's aerial scan, and it's quite possible with manipulating the scans that we can get quite good resolution. Most of the work was to work out how they could actually get the facades of the buildings, and that involved flight paths with scanners and photogrammetry. Okay, so just stop that and move it on, because I'm conscious of time. You can let me know. Okay, so that's the two data sets, started in 2008 and then on to 2015. That's the section of the city which is scanned. So we have the whole point cloud for the city, and we continuously work with it, trying to virtualize the whole historic parts of the city. So this is Dublin Castle, and there you see the resolution again of the scan is not bad. So we're working with that to create models. So processing and organization. So the data comes in various formats, whether it's point cloud or photogrammetry. It must be organized. So the one sort of well, that's just sort of intensity of the return signal. I'll talk about that later. And this is sort of different types of point clouds. But registration is where a lot of the work is. Now the scanners can actually register while on site, but the scans are all taken from different angles, locations, so they must be orientated inside a 3D space so that they match up together, and that requires a lot of work with software, etc. Now, it is possible to turn the point cloud into what's described as a mesh object, so you've got a solid object. Other than that, the point cloud is just a series of points in 3D space and not very useful. Okay, so here's just some post-processing which shows change detection, and this is some of the Celtic crosses, Kel's cross, market cross. So yeah, by using high-resolution scans, you can look at the changes over periods. Again, here's Doonbeg and Kerry, and you can see from the aerial scans the changes of the landscape there and the problem with climate change, the effects of climate change. Okay, so we looked at how we collected data, then how we processed the data together. So the idea of what we describe as dynamic knowledge models. The first sort of change from the point cloud to an object, an intelligent object, is to describe the object as it is in the building. What type of architectural element is it? A wall, a roof, sculpting, etc. So this is just an example of how you can actually use, say, BIM software, which is normally used for new buildings, for historic structures, and that's done in ArchiCAD. So it's just a sample of how it's modeled. Now, trying to get some sort of logic in terms of how we model buildings. So, I mean, it's obvious that we will link the surveys of the buildings with historic information. So we describe that as the architectural rules, the primitives that are used to build up the 3D objects, as they're not lines or not vectors, are described as a series of shape grammars, shape vocabularies, and these are arranged together. So, so by understanding the architectural rules of the different periods, we can then use the primitives and align them inside the laser scan to create 3D solid models, which then can, so this is just a sort of blow up of that. You can see from architectural pattern books how we've built computer shapes, and these are sort of the way the computer would think, like it'll take a block, smaller block, add, subtract, rotate, etc. So that's how the computer will actually build up the 3D models, and that's sort of, as opposed to building every object for different locations. So from that, we look at building up libraries of particular objects, especially related to the local architecture, historic architecture in the city. So, they can be windows, roofs. And of course, sculpting gets a little bit more complex, and we'll look at that. So, okay, that's the first stage of adding some sort of intelligence and knowledge to your digital object. So it's represented now as an architectural element, site, building, etc., by conversion. So we're going to look at using both sets of data, where we use the point cloud, and we also use the solid models to look at conservation problems. So here we just look at it very simply, where we have different levels of detail between low and high, and of course there's a lot in between that. So in the case of this is from the forecourts again, so you can see the high density scan there and the 3D object which is built, so the engineers could analyze it. One of the first things that we can do is produce 2D vector information, which is still being used for planning and for management of heritage sites. But also the 3D data is very useful alongside that. And then, moving on for other analysis, we have different systems for decay mapping. So this is the capitals. So this is sort of looking at how you can use the 3D model and the point cloud. So at the top here we have the point cloud of the trusses which are supporting this dome here, the plastered dome, and this you know, it was to work out, it's like taking an X-ray, we could work out how the supports were, you know, what problems we had with supports for the plastered dome. So you can see the cuts and sections from the point cloud tell us a lot, in addition to the BIM model. Now, in terms of accuracy, because this is really important, when you convert to point cloud, which as long as your survey is accurate, so the point cloud is usually, you know, it's automated, it's usually very accurate, and as long as the instruments are calibrated, etc. So, you know, we have systems for measuring the accuracy of the 3D solid model. So you can actually put the original scan and the solid model together in a software system called Cloud Compare. But here, you know, we were able to achieve, say, 5mm accuracy, so that the engineers could work on the model then for finite element analysis, etc. So that, you know, so accuracy is possible to measure, and it depends on what you're going to use it for. So this is a sort of ending to that. That's just one of the projects where the you can see here, here's the high resolution scan, and here's the carved Corinthian capital, which was partially carved by CNC and then finished by craft workers. And it's just the links here with Historic Scotland, who were carrying out the same sort of work. So digitally assisted stone carving can, you know, where you can use the 3D data to feed into it. But normally what happens is that it's roughed out digitally on the machines, and then the craft worker completes the object. Okay, for the sort of moving on then for documentation, reconstruction. So here, you know, we're looking at archaeology, and this is some of the work that Simona and Emer did. So again, we're applying the languages, architectural languages, so we can put together the objects. So this is a Romanesque doorcase, and you can see this sort of makeup of the different objects. And so it's based on, you know, trying to understand the language of that particular period. And from that, then we can produce whatever documentation in 2D or 3D for the conservation work to be carried out. Okay, presentation. So presentation of buildings, either on-site, off-site, for education, for cultural tourism. So this gets us into the area of game engines. Now, so Leinster House, like a lot of the parliaments around the world now, and following on from Ottawa, Leinster House was scanned, and we produced a historic BIM model for that. So from that we can produce documentation for any sort of changes, conservation issues from the building. But it also was used for recording the progress. So where you have reconstruction, conservation, documentation is very important, because everything has been opened up. So we use the scan and the BIM to record, and from that we produce 2D PDFs, which can be used then to record any changes or any continual problems with the building. So you can see here. So now, in terms of presentation of the building, this is where we started looking at game engine software. So game engines, as everybody knows, are used to build games, which you know, can be anything from education to games where you blow up things or whatever, war games, etc. So this technology can be used. The reason it's more interesting than, say, working with software, GIS or BIM, is because you can make these sort of packaged for the user. So all of the interactions with the building are built into it, and you hand it over as this sort of packaged product where people can walk through or can interact in whatever ways they like. But there's a lot of work in it. So so this is Leinster House. We put the terrestrial scan, which is the Parliament, we put that together with the aerial scan. So we have all of the buildings around it, and from that then we started looking at how we could look at the morphology of the site, how the site changed over time, and this is all done inside of a game engine. So there's just the sort of finished product from both aerial and laser scan, and of course documentation. So you can scroll through time on that. I'm not going to show the video now because I'll be short of time. So we can see here. So that would be an interaction for, that, you know, for most sites where you can show the evolution of the site and how it changes. So that's, and then the interaction between the user is usually something like where they can scroll through the different periods of time. So just for anybody who's interested in it, it's not easy, and it requires programming and scripting behind the scenes. So it's not just something that like SketchUp where you can pull together a model fairly quickly. So usually here we have to use specialists, sometimes from outside of cultural heritage, to pull together. So augmented virtual reality. So this is where you can project your 3D images using phones and other devices onto another object or onto a surface. So you can show, where you arrive on the site, you could actually show a 3D representation over time using the phone. And that's described as augmented virtual reality. So in terms of getting your hands on some of these objects and using them in education, right? You know, most of the projects are based on, say, clients, usually the government, and they will release a lot of the objects. In Dublin, we're lucky because the laser scan of the city is made available to anybody who wants to use it from the university. So, but here's just an example of 3D objects. It's from a European program called, if I can open it, just give it a few minutes, called 3D Icons. And
we're so sorry to interrupt, but we're running a little out of time, so. Okay,
yeah, I'm just there now. So you have the site there, you can look at this yourself. Okay, so the 3D objects are up on this site, you can download them. So, and I'll just finish up with the very last. Sorry about this. Okay, so I can just. Now, I just finish up on this one because it's sort of a bit odd and it's unusual, but it's very much about education, if it opens. So this is Armagh Observatory. Maybe opened already. Okay, so you can see the 3D object there. Okay, so a lot of these objects are up on this site, which I've shown you later. If I don't get back into, oh yeah, okay, right, I'll just finish on this one. So here, we didn't scan the observatory, we used existing plans and we built the model from that. The idea here was, so you can say, and our students did this, from the drawings were extruded to create the 3D object. 3D object then is, so the building is an object, and we're trying to tell a story here from the observatory. In the late 1700s, they used these meridian markers to mark out longitude. So they wanted to find the longitude on the Earth's surface, and then they pointed the telescope at the planet and they could measure the angle between the longitude and the planet. So it's not very complex. So we're using here a model of the night sky. We're building the objects, the meridian markers, and we've built the observatory, just the building, and then we've so that's brought into Unity, and it's just you can see as the night changes. Okay, so the night sky is shown in the game engine, and then, you know, we want to set up the whole sort of operation where the student can look through the telescope. So this is the reconstruction of the meridian sorry, Mural Circle is the name of that telescope, and you can see here, this is how the angles are measured. So first, the telescope hits the meridian marker, which is usually a mile away, and then it hits the star, and the angle is measured. So that's just an example of, so our students collected the information on site, we surveyed on site, and then we used that later as educational tools. So it's a question of putting your 3D models, your data collection, 3D models, and then bringing it into the classroom. So that's why I put that one up. So that's it. I hope I didn't go on too long, Nurdan.
No problem. Thank you very much, dear Maurice, for introducing us your experience on digital technologies. We all need to consider integrating such technologies in conservation education. It was a very influential presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And by the way, I would like to remind the audience to please write your questions and comments in the chat box to be discussed at the end of the session. I believe we have Paul McMahon in the session, so maybe we can go on to his presentation.
Yes, Nurdan, apologies to everyone. I just was delayed joining you, but I'm here at the moment, and thanks to Maurice for going there ahead of me.
We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks, Nurdan.
Our first speaker is Paul McMahon, who is the Vice President of ICOMOS-Ireland and also the Vice President of ICOMOS-CIF for the European region. He is a trustee of the Council on Training for Architectural Conservation, COTAC, and the President of the Industrial Heritage Association of Ireland. Today, he will discuss the role of digital technologies and issues of crisis management under COVID-19. Let me open the presentation for you. I will help him with the, we have to stop Maurice's.
Okay.
Yes. Here we go.
Nurdan, as you can see, the title I've used is very much the current language, I suppose, that's been used in Europe, this term digital transformation. And I suppose from the cultural heritage sector point of view, it's whether it's viewed as a threat or an opportunity. But I would just like to start by saying it's by no means new to the cultural heritage world that the use of BIM, as Maurice described earlier, is relatively well established now in practice. And the two slides I show actually show the chief conservation architect in Ireland just reviewing some BIM material. Maurice was the project geo-surveyor. It's one of the projects that Maurice mentioned. So on the one side, you have, I suppose, BIM or digital transformation in operation in the heritage area, or heritage BIM, as some people call it. And then on the other side, you have, this is an apprentice mason in the London Craft College, and both digital and manual technical drawing skills are incorporated into the project. So I suppose it's like saying either end of the spectrum, we have digital technology being introduced. Now, this saying that I use here, proper care of the old and proper fit of the new, that's a term I use when I'm introducing the ICOMOS conservation principles. And I see it as what I call a catch-all term. And it's one that in the main, people are comfortable with. Sometimes the idea of ICOMOS principles and ICOMOS charters can be off-putting. And so it's important that the language we use when we're introducing the principles, and that we'll call it to a new audience, that we use a language that people are familiar with. But it brings us really what I would call the core mission statement of ICOMOS is is really to ensure that the ICOMOS principles are spread throughout the cultural heritage sector, and that they're familiar with it, because they are the bedrock really of the standards that ICOMOS would like to see established. So as Nurdan said there, I'm vice president for CIF, and what I propose to do today is really, I'm vice president for CIF for Europe. So I really would not feel competent to address broader international issues, but what I'd like to do is to bring you up to date on developments which are relevant to CIF and relevant to the education and training family, because the cultural heritage sector is a very broad family, and you know, it includes education providers, practitioners, policy makers, and more we're looking at engagement with the public or communities. So in a way, when we're looking at how what the challenges for CIF in its capacity building role is really to reach out to that broad audience. The legacy, the European Cultural Heritage Year, probably for many was a relatively quiet year, and I would be aware that some people would say, oh, I wasn't aware that 2018 was European Year of Cultural Heritage, but in effect, and there were a number of very significant developments which are relevant to the CIF European membership. The ICOMOS was commissioned by the European Commission to produce a guidance document, which is now available and it's out there. It's European Quality Principles for Cultural Heritage Intervention, and it has a particular 2 chapters really, which would be of interest on the education and training front. One is the core one dealing with education and training issues, and the other one, I suppose, is the critical one of research. The principles are based on our standard setting texts related to cultural heritage, and what's very important in terms of the status or position of cultural heritage, it's recognizing not just the economic benefits of cultural heritage, but also those critical environmental and social impacts that cultural heritage can have. The initiative involved, there were 2 strands in the European Commission's initiative. One was called the Voice of Culture Strand, and that brought together, it was a very large gathering of NGOs, a very widespread gathering of the NGOs, and also what was called the open method of communication, which also involved a number of workshops and seminars involving the state heritage sectors. So 2 of the key players, the NGOs and the cultural heritage sectors, were invited by the European Commission to consider issues and challenges relating to cultural heritage. And all I can do is refer you, there are 2 excellent publications from both of those groups, and they're on the European Commission website, and they're well worth looking at. But out of those arose, one of the recommendations was the need for European quality principles. And I suppose ICOMOS was selected because ICOMOS was seen to have that broad overseeing role. In other words, we don't represent any particular sectoral interests, but we represent all sectoral interests. So, hence that European Quality Principles document was produced. And then what was recognized that education needs would be informed by the ICOMOS CIF capacity building guidelines, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and also out of the two groups, the VOC group and the OMC group, came the acknowledgement of the range of emerging heritage sector role profiles. Another significant initiative that came out of the European Year of Cultural Heritage was the Erasmus Plus programme, and it has a particular focus on cultural heritage sectoral skills analysis. And so there will be an opportunity for CIF to engage with this programme. It's only at an early stage yet, but I think it will provide a great opportunity for CIF to engage with the various other sectoral interests to really, it's a 4-year programme, and I think it will provide a very good opportunity for CIF and CIF members to address a broad range of issues around sectoral skills. And then the other relevant one that I'm sure you're aware of is there's an EC public consultation on opportunities offered by digital technology. And I think the calls for submission are due in this month, but it'll be interesting to see the outcome of that. So if we could move on, Nurdan. Now, what I also did was I just took an opportunity. These are just my own personal thoughts on, as we mentioned, the legacy of the European cultural heritage. Also, it's really an issue of COVID-19 and the legacy that leaves us with one way or the other. We're not quite sure how ultimately it's going to pan out, but it seems to be labeled as the greatest economic crisis since the post-Second World War years. And in terms of crisis management, it does make sense, just remembering that ICOMOS is an advisory body to UNESCO, but UNESCO was primarily set up post-Second World War to deal with major rebuilding issues and the impact that those issues would have on cultural heritage. So at the moment, there's obviously an important global role for UNESCO in working our way out of the legacy of COVID-19, and they're already engaged with our sister organizations, ICCROM and ICOM, in considering the development of a strategic framework for post-pandemic capacity building. So you can see capacity building is the term that, that now comfortably applies to the education and training area. And then the question is, these are personal thoughts, as I say, are there lessons for CIF in the enforced isolation experience? And these are just my own thoughts, but these could be, there are no positives obviously coming out of the COVID-19 legacy. We really are looking at a human disaster. But what we appear to be seeing is an apparent increase in community awareness due to the isolation factors and limitations on people's movements. We seem to be seeing an increase in community awareness of place, also a sense of space, and a reduced pace of life. There seems to be a sense that coming out of this, there may be different senses of values. And obviously, in terms of the cultural heritage, and it was identified during the European Year of Cultural Heritage as a major contributor to this sense of well-being, which seems to be very much a current theme running through society, that after the banking collapse of 2010 and 2018, there does seem to be a sense that we were getting a lot of things very, very wrong, and that there is an opportunity revisit some of the mistakes that were made at that time. There's also now a broad experience of remote working practice and distance learning. So it's a question of, is that something we build on? Are there benefits or positives in looking at that area? I'm only throwing these out as ideas. There's also one that I think is very significant for the cultural heritage area, and that's the acknowledgement of the role of frontline workers and the need for public services. Now, while that may just appear to apply to the medical area, it's very obvious that we're not really looking at what were considered simple or non-labor intensive exercises which could be applied to areas of industry. And of all areas, the cultural heritage area and the medical area is one whereby we're not looking at line production. We're not looking at, we'll call them off the peg solutions. All cultural heritage effort and exercise is, as we often say, every building and every monument is different and every challenge is different. So we're not looking at the type of practices that are often promoted globally. Now then there's the uncertain future. This is a big challenge, the uncertain future for a range of established cultural heritage sectoral interests. And this can apply to obviously educational institutions, but it can also apply to the obvious short-term threats that there will be to practitioners. So again, maybe the call is that CIF needs to confirm its role in the post-pandemic capacity building scenario. So that's just something I throw out, so we can move on. The other thing then I told Christina and Nurdan I'd refer to the Irish experience. And what we've been doing in Ireland, and maybe this is a model which maybe they already do it, other education and training national scientific committees, but in Ireland we've been undertaking reviews of the state of conservation, education and training in Ireland. And we've been doing that now for almost 20 years. Every 5 years we undertake a review. It involves consultation, because we must remember the strength of ICOMOS is that the education and training group is not the expert group. The experts and practitioners and educationers, they are engaged really in the other NSCs that have their own particular function. So what we what our ETNSC would be doing would be consulting with all the NSCs so that they would come back to us and come back with recommendations as to how they saw education, we call them capacity building needs, being addressed. And then we have invited stakeholders, because there are some stakeholders, we say particularly on the policy making front, or in some of the heritage sectors, who as of yet aren't engaged with ICOMOS. Possibly that should change. We should think of broadening our membership groups to engage with those community interests or policy making interests, but that's something to be considered. It's important that these reviews, they're not comprehensive, but they do give an overview and they include recommendations. They also capture the advances which have taken place, and also, unfortunately, in recent years, the decline in support for key sectors. And then what I'll end with is just some of the key observations which came out of this ICOMOS-Ireland Education and Training National Scientific Review, but I'm sure it would apply universally. And You know, the one that's often said is the multidisciplinary nature of conservation, and the question of, do we talk to each other? Do we understand each other? And what was felt was very important was that there should be a shared understanding of conservation principles amongst all stakeholders. So that's, we'll call it, a basic understanding that we would share with policymakers, with the public. And there's obviously an education or a training education challenge there as to how we reach out. And the Council on Training for Architectural Conservation is heavily engaged with this issue of looking at how digitally, or how we can have distance and online modules dealing with this shared understanding and how that would be dealt with. The other thing that's important, and this is again is another area where COTAC has informed the CIF in terms of its capacity building guidelines, and that's where, while we'd aim to have a shared understanding of conservation principles among all stakeholders, there's also a very specific need to focus on the specific skills required by each of the group stakeholders, their individual competences and their skills. And in that context, COTAC have produced a conservation matrix, which kind of covers basically roles in conservation of the stakeholders. And also, I think more importantly, it's looked at the role profiles, and there's a role profile template that was developed that's worth looking at. I'm not saying it's I think the important thing that came out of the European Year of Cultural Heritage, that in effect, while we're ICOMOS is dealing with principles, it is up to each member state and professional bodies, or the various bodies within those areas, the education and training bodies, to consider the particular needs of their own areas, with a very strong emphasis on regional characteristics, that there isn't one cure-all or one cover-all, that it's very important to consider those specific items. I'm stating the obvious, I know, in some of these observations, but I'm throwing them out as challenges. And one is, are the existing training and education provisions fit for purpose? That, you know, this is something that I think there are issues now, I know, being thrown up in a number of European countries of fit for purpose, and I suppose that's where the dialogue between providers and practitioners comes into play. Another very significant one that came out of the quality principles was, are the existing training, are there recognized systems of accreditation and registration for practitioners in the heritage sector? In other words, if we're to see the heritage sector establishing itself in a mainstream way, in other words, if it's to engage in the same way as other sectors, there is a need. I see it as, we'll call it a card-carrying system, that in other words, clients and procurement agencies will have a form that they can identify the competences and qualities of the practitioners in the areas. So that's another challenge I throw out. Another important one is I've just finished, is provision for lifelong learning an integral part of these systems. And then the development of the significant role and contribution of the digital and community sector in advancing conservation principles should be recognized as a mainstream capacity building challenge within the cultural heritage education training policies and frameworks. Thanks for your patience. Thanks, Nurdan.
Nurdan,
You're muted.
muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much, dear Paul, for your thought-provoking discussion. And your last bullet point provides a direct lead, actually, both to our last presentation and also to our next presentation. So thank you so much. The next presentation will be about one of the most difficult and also the most important issues in conservation: capacity building of the frontline workers who are actually practicing the conservation work at the site. Grainne Shaffrey will be discussing the issue, and she's a conservation architect, urban designer, and is currently the president of ICOMOS-Ireland. Based on her experience, she will introduce us the practitioner's perspective. So the floor is yours, Grainne.
Thank you, Nurdan. And I'm just going to share the screen now. Does that come up?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Now, okay, lovely. Nurdan, thank you, and thank you to CIF and ICOMOS-Turkey and Christina and Paul for getting me involved today. And I'll try and keep swift. I may leave out a little thing at the end to save a bit of time. But I'm speaking as a practitioner, as Nurdan says, primarily somebody who's interested in the ongoing learning process through practice and training. So I have my own practice, I employ other architects, I work with other disciplines on site. But I suppose the practice is very broadly based. It's very much steeped in place-specific approaches, concerned with the distinctiveness, particularity, and the local. And while I would subscribe to the scientific ethos of ICOMOS, I also believe that art, creativity, and imagination are essential in our engagement with cultural heritage, and particularly with trying to get that sense of place. So this presentation is just to stimulate discussion. I have no solutions. The only answer probably is yes or no. There is no replacement for site experience. It is essential. Paul suggested I might remind ourselves of the Quebec Declaration on the Preservation of the Spirit of Place. And I'm not going to go through it all, but I suppose it very wonderfully captures the spirit of place, as the tangible and the intangible, and all the different components of it. It also acknowledges that it's a complex and multiform concept. So I might speak as an architect, but I'm very mindful the new paradigm is that we work multidisciplinary. It's horizontal. The ordinary has become the extraordinary. That multidisciplinary experts and traditional practitioners are critical. That a place can have several spirits and be shared by different groups. That the spirit of place, and this is really, really important, and this is where I think we are challenged to some extent by digital world enabled too, but the spirit of place is transmitted essentially by people and interactive communication. So I think this is a challenge of communication. And I think then Quebec Declaration acknowledged the need for non-formal and formal mechanisms of transition. So this is the world we live in. This is some of my ICOMOS-Ireland colleagues. You know, that is one way of engaging. And I have with my colleagues in work been having, as we work remotely, we haven't all been back in the office together, weekly Zoom meetings. And they're effective to some extent, but they are also very distant. That was before COVID-19. And I suppose that was a very intense and busy educational tour of a project as part of a learning program. And this is site yesterday. This is and this is a relatively benign and gentle site out in the air, essentially working on a ruinous building, bringing it back into use. But everywhere we are reminded of, I suppose, the care and safety necessary around building. So I suppose what I feel are some of the areas that are challenged but remain essential is this idea of how do we work collectively? How do we work collaboratively? The learning that comes spontaneously. I ask Nurdan a question about a specific project, which prompts a discussion with Paul or Maurice on something else that takes us around to a whole other area that we didn't intend to talk upon, but it is a solution to another issue. The idea of how we learn, and I'm conscious in a practice environment or in a project environment, there's a kind of a learning by osmosis, a sponge effect. There are bad aspects to that because you learn good habits and bad habits. Touch, I mean, it's, you know, we are dealing with something that is material and haptic. How do we communicate that sense of touch? The other senses, Quebec Declaration talks about odors and textures and material. Whisper, a sight has sounds, which is transmitted and transferred. And then the whole idea of the peripheral vision. I stand in a space, but part of me perceives more than my eyes can see. The opportunities, the collapsed geographies. Look at us now communicating in such a wonderful way across continents and time zones. And yet we can connect at our own pace. Very kindly, Nurdan, you're recording this, you'll make it available. We can go back and look in more depth at what Maurice has presented. The digital efficiencies that BIM is a remarkable means. We can work online at the same time, on the same model, on the same project. The wider reach we gain and the wider embrace, both of people, of geographies, but also of disciplines and questions. We can be, as Paul said, gentler on the earth and on ourselves through this form of communication. And we can begin to uncover the local, even though we are distant. The actual place where we can get stuck in and understand is right beside us. But yet I want to go back to some of the, maybe the challenges or around this new paradigm, which is already with us, and the idea of people being essential to transmit. So this is an image of a vernacular house in a typical village street in Ireland. If I bring my colleague Brian to it, then suddenly you can see it's a home of a certain size. It's small, it gives it scale. If I want to talk to you about this wonderful, and apologies for this very Irish-centric presentation, but the marvelous 18th century wall breakwater out into Dublin Bay, built to essentially create a deep water channel in a very precarious marine situation for safe passage for ships into Dublin. That today, and this is it in yellow, the length of it, this wonderful, it's 5 kilometer stone wall, today remains a piece of essential infrastructure to the port of Dublin that drives so much of the open Irish economy. 70% of what we import and export comes in through this point, and this 18th century wall is at the heart of it. If I want to give you a sense of the scale of that wall, when it was built, was longer than the extremities from one side to the other of the historic city of Dublin at that time and into the 19th century. If I try and tell you a bit about the hidden bits and the stories and the connections, if I tell you that James Joyce, our great writer, on his first date with Nora Barnacle, walked the Great South Wall, half of it, which is only available, less than half today for the walkers, that it was a place of immense amenity. And much of this time when Joyce was walking around 1904, when his great masterpiece, Ulysses, was staged, I kind of like to think this photo, maybe this is Joyce and Nora Barnacle going for their walk, but this chap here with a towel under his arm, perhaps coming back from the Half Moon Swimming Club, halfway along this great south wall that today remains a very important place for people to refresh themselves on a warm and the here rough day. And yet this sits within a cultural landscape which embraces culture, man in the city, and nature. The small little Arctic tern, a tiny bird that circumnavigates the world every 6 months, roosts on an abandoned mooring part in the harbour opposite the power station. So it becomes an ecological place. How do I communicate that story effectively if I can't bring you there? Or do you only get half the picture? And yet in this new paradigm, we have wonderful projects like this one, very, very briefly, and it's one of 15 case studies that ICOMOS-Ireland have brought together in a publication to promote this whole idea of communities engaging with their heritage and power of place. This bridge where the local community, early bridge, wanted to have listed, protected, but was overseen. And they worked with the archaeologists in Queen's University. They carried out a series of investigations, and they, in a sense, unearthed not just a very interesting brickmaking tradition in the area that worked with traveling brickmakers, set up a demonstration with the last traveling brickmaker journeyman in Britain and Ireland, but they also uncovered that the kind of a historic battle in the late 19th century, which took place here, which was disputed, the location between the local community felt it was in one location. The archaeologist experts were convinced it was a kilometre away. They did the excavation and they discovered that the community that had the, I suppose, an expert knowledge of the passage of stories through time were actually right. And all of that was brought together in an incredibly well presented project that convinced the authorities that this is important and brought to light the history of the bridge. And now it is a designated listed structure. And Juhani Palasma, the Finnish architect, talks about architecture as not being objects, that we experience a window by looking through it, or a door by entering and leaving. So it's a felt and enacted experience. So just in a way to think about ICOMOS and the CIF role, I'm very conscious also that ICOMOS sets principles, as Paul has said. We don't actually set curricula or define the accreditation or the standards, and I've been involved in accreditation myself of architecture courses. But we do set the principles that inform how the courses are set or run. And I do think then that the physical experience of site is essential. And I think that there are ways then where we can embrace the potential of new technologies. And we have blended learning opportunities, which is, yes, about site and online, but might also be blending skills and disciplines and experiences. They may be about blending where one is. I might be totally emerging in my experience, or I may be established, but we could share a learning experience together. The need for mentoring is vital, but also the need to seek out and welcome other insights and voices. And again, I'm speaking this very nuts and bolts as a practitioner. You need to know other expertise, other layers to understand, if I'm dealing with a building, to really understand its significance. There's also new language, new expression, our way of expressing, and also a way of interpreting and understanding, and new ways of communicating spirit of place, storytelling being very important. But I also think film is a really invaluable one. And Nurdan, if I have two minutes just to very simply show you a clip of a film of a very ordinary fireplace from the 1970s. It's part of a bigger project we were involved in restoring this building, which is an 18th century house of great importance. but has been occupied right up to a tenement occupation right into the 1970s. I'm going to move that on because I wanted you to look at this fireplace, which is very ordinary. Most people would throw them out of their houses. And then if I can move, bring you to, let's see, here. And this wonderful skilled craftsman who's repairing this. And I feel that film is terrific in capturing the detail of what's involved, getting a close-up that you wouldn't otherwise maybe get in terms of the skill. And because it's moving, I think perhaps we don't use it enough as a skill. But my memory of this as a project is remarkably moved by the care and attention given to this, in one way, very ordinary material culture, but very extraordinary in terms of the story it's communicating. I'll just, because this is being recorded and there's no credits on it, I'll just acknowledge the filmmaker Paddy Cahill and Dublin City Council and Dublin City Council Culture Connects, who actually own this film. And I'm going to stop it shortly, but as I say, it's a way of celebrating skill and craft, and perhaps communicating a love and an attention for something that we all do, a materiality which is also vital. We have no sound effects on this, and this is another hearth in the hearth, and where here the mason is piecing together the fragments that are left. In another situation, may not, this is not medieval or Roman or any, great historic, it's a possibly 19th century stone hearth in fragments, but it's part of a flat where the family that lived there are still people around, so it has a direct connection. I'll stop it and I'll come out and I'll just go back, and really all I want to do is to finish maybe with a kind of a plea in one way for how do we continue to educate I suppose cultural heritage in a way that allows for the curiosity and inquiry. And yes, we are dealing with challenging subjects sometimes, so it's not necessarily always about joy and pleasure, but there are moments out on site where joy and pleasure is absolutely essential. And how do we transfer that in this kind of blended part digital, part material world? Thank you. That's me, Nurdan. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, dear Grainne, for addressing such an important issue, and especially for the beautiful video. It was really wonderful. It's a concern that we all need to reflect upon, and I'm sure there will be a productive discussion about the spirit of place and the ongoing professional learning at the end of this session. I guess we do not have Amnon Baror with us. There's a technical problem. Possibly he's living through a technical
Hello, I'm with you.
I'm
with you.
okay.
Okay,
so
through Facebook, yeah.
So happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry for the problems. I'm sorry, I'm deeply sorry.
No problem, welcome. Our next presentation will be approaching the theme from a different and a very significant perspective. We will search for answers regarding the question whether conservation education can be utilized to overcome social traumas. Amnon Baror, a member of ICOMOS-CIF and ICOMOS-Israel, is a senior lecturer at the David Azrieli School of Architecture and the founder of the Conservation Academic Program in Tel Aviv University. The award-winning professor is also the founder of Amnon Baror Tel Gazit Architects, where he has been involved in the preservation of many historical sites in Israel. His presentation will be addressing an approach which utilizes conservation education as a way to deal with traumas at different scales. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Would you let me share the screen, please?
I think you're allowed.
Wait a minute. I have to find it. Sorry.
There should be a green sign at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, but I have to find my presentation
Okay.
because I had so many problems. So just a minute.
I'm sorry.
Let me. Yeah, here we are. And now I have to
call for people to make questions. I think there are many thought-provoking issues already the presenters have said. So
Okay, so
make questions and
please write your questions in the chat box to any speaker that you want to direct your questions to. We will be collecting the questions from the chat box at the end of the session. Professor Boro, can I help you with the? Okay.
do you have my presentation?
Yes, I have it.
So can you please put it on because I cannot. I'm sorry, I cannot.
Sure, I'll help you with it.
I cannot do it. Ah, here it is. Here it is. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Do you see it?
I've shared it. Do you wish to share it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm stopping then.
Okay. Here we are. Okay. So again, I apologize for the delay and the problems. My name is Amnon Bar-Or, and first of all, I would like to thank very much Cristina Gonzalez and Professor Claudine Dehome and Professor Nurdan Kuban for letting me join this webinar, and all other colleagues, of course. I was born in Tel Aviv and graduated as an architect in the University of Florence in 1978. I studied archaeology in Haifa and in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I'm a lecturer and supervisor since 1996 at the Israeli School of Architecture in Tel Aviv University as a supervisor and of the conservation studio for architect students, final architecture projects, and master thesis. Frequently, I'm engaged with the conservation in conflict zones and heritage of post-traumatic areas. For the past 25 years, my professional work in planning and preservation has been combined with teaching at the School of Architecture at Tel Aviv University. The Studio for Conservation that I supervise over 20 years, which is part of the BA Architecture students' syllabus as an optional studio for 4 years or graduation project. In this studio, the students encounter issues relating to the memories and conservation of culturally significant buildings and sites in post-traumatic areas. Between 2010 and 2012, I moderated a preservation workshop that engaged in research and planning in Manshia area in Jaffa, the Arab city of Jaffa next to Tel Aviv, which was partly eradicated after Jaffa's occupation in 1948. Currently, few structures remain, and most of the space serve as a promenade next to huge parks and parking lots. The space carries difficult memories and traumas for the population groups that were negatively affected there. The Muslim community, who bear the memory of both Manshia's occupation in 1948 and the ethnic cleansing from the Jewish Tel Aviv, and the Jews who bear the memory of murderous terrorist attack on high school students waiting in line to enter the Delphinarium nightclub in that area. When my students realized the traumatic nature of this space and the harsh memories engaged with it, I turned to an old friend of mine, a psychoanalyst, and asked him to join and help us understand the psychological implications of planning in this damaged site. Embarrassment zones. I would explain what is this meaning of embarrassment zone, because this is crucial for my studio. The political reality in Israel has created many historical sites in which local population have experienced collective and personal traumas. Traumas that have yet to be investigated in depth and have not so far been adequately addressed. In our current reality, teaching conservation requires what we also deal with difficult memories produced in post-traumatic locations, where effort have been made to erase or cover up events. Disregarding or repressing those traumas ensure repeat of previous patterns in according to the repetition compulsions in Freud's theory. We look for past culture remains that suffered from constant attempt to erase the difficult memories by demolishing the building's heritage. Those attempts based on the illusion which physical erase will eradicate memories and intangible values. Embarrassment zones are created in a reality that at a certain moment in time produces a mental state of distress with pain and sense of dead end, a type of a mental labyrinth. The common human reaction is dissociation, in which the psyche ignores the labyrinth by way of its imagined or realistic destruction. This type of solution produces an imagined reality in which the labyrinth does not exist anymore. Opposite dissociation is means of treating embarrassment area are memories and consciousness, which do not enable actual erasure. In fact, while wandering in embarrassment zones, one notices architectural lapses, such as remain of old structure. I would give the examples of a few examples of studios of last year. And the first one would be in the city of Haifa, Wadi Salib, Muslim quarter, was a Muslim quarter before 48. You see it on the left, and then the destruction during the war 48, and then the Jewish newcomers that entered the same buildings and they were eradicated also. So in this area, this post-traumatic area, the student decided to inquire and to bring back life and life texture and life tissue to this damaged area. It was a graduation project planned by an architecture student that I supervised during the period after attending conservation studio last year. The project takes place in Wadi Salib in Haifa, the lower northern slope of Mount Carmel. Wadi Salib was built as an Arab neighborhood in downtown Haifa in the early 20s. Over the years, the neighborhood inhabitants, both Palestinians and Jews, were uprooted twice, and most of its homes were destroyed or sealed. In 59, there were the Wadi Salib riots. They were mainly based on the socio-economical situation in those places. And the solution of the municipality was, let's destroy it. This is the way we're going to solve the problem. My student, first of all, she had 1 year, the entire year to do it. So the first semester she could go to the site and make all the research and documentation of the place. So that's why this part was completely okay. But when it came to know the place and the second semester, coming back was impossible. Anyway, the main issues and the main cultural significance of this place was first of all, the Haifa harbor, and then the train station, the Turkish train station that was connected to the train line from Istanbul to Medina in Saudi Arabia. And of course, the multi-ethnic city, which combines Muslims, Christians, and Jews together in the same ruined area. So she made this graduation project in this area. You could see the sealed building today. And in the same street, the train station, the Ottoman train station, which is a historic monument, which is not conserved. I would go on to show the project. I mean, in this area, which is a very narrow piece of land between the sea and the mountain, of course, all the streets and all the main roads and train had to pass there. So during the years, all the urban tissue was completely destroyed. So she, first of all, managed to solve the traffic problems, and then afterwards, the restoring this quarter around the train station. So this is part of a project mainly to bring back life to this destroyed area and bring back people to live there. My second example of last semester in the studio was the Arab village of Sheikh Mounes, which is in the northern part of Tel Aviv. You could see Tel Aviv in the northern part, Sheikh Mounes village. And it's inside the actual Tel Aviv University campus today. The studio encounters in planning an embarrassment zone of Sheikh Mounes, a Palestinian rural village within the region of Tel Aviv city today, inside the Tel Aviv University campus. Its residents, like Wadi Salib and other Palestinian villages and neighborhoods, were deported during the 48 war. In the first week of the studio, the students managed to visit the area only once. The following week, a closure was enforced, and the limitation did not let us return to the site, and the student could not meet with anyone, including members of the communities which occupied the place in the past and in the present. The limited knowledge and intimacy of the student with the site had a major impact on the project results. In trauma sites, a short glimpse could be misleading. Additional senses should be activated in order to understand the place, as well as mobilize the right sensibility while being exposed to personal memories of people and collective memories of communities.
Professor Bar, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're running out of time.
Okay,
so could you
I will only add that, thank you very much. I would only add that those projects were done by students, mainly girls. Half of them were Jewish and half Palestinians. And it was very interesting to see the different approaches of the Jewish student and the Arab students on the same subject. The main thing was combining the three traumas of the Arab students: the trauma of the subject of the studio, the trauma of their own families that they come from, and the COVID-19 trauma. All those three were really, it was very, very interesting and inspiring, even though I'm quite disappointed from be results which were not very in-depth because of less, there was no authenticity when they made projects without seeing them, without knowing them. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for sharing your experience. It's an influential example of where we should direct our attention to within our education programs, and also a valid contribution to the April 18th theme, Shared Cultures, Shared Heritage, and Shared Responsibility. For now, we will be taking a short self-service coffee break. Please take your time to make yourself some coffee while we collect the questions to be discussed. We'll be back in about 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Hello, we're back with the questions. I wish to introduce my colleague Ebru Omay from ICOMOS-Turkey to moderate the discussion session. Ebru, the floor is yours. Ebru, you're muted.
Same mistake again. Hello, everyone. I was very pleased to meet you all and to listen to your very inspiring speeches. Now we have some questions. I want to start quickly so we have time to discuss. Just a moment. I will try to share my screen with you. So.
Ebru, maybe just read it up because then we can see the speaker responding. Otherwise, we will not see the full screen.
Okay, do not share the screen, just ask the questions then.
Okay, you can read all the questions and comments in the chat box. You can write them down or copy them so you won't lose all the comments and questions, because maybe we will not have time to mention all of them. So the first question is from Sevim Aslan to everyone. To Maurice Murphy, actually. Does Maurice Murphy prefer especially BIM or ArchiCAD instead of AutoCAD?
No, no preference. Just different software tools which will carry out different different procedures, etc., etc. So, but what I was trying to stress there is that, you know, okay, all this stuff has come along in the last 5-10 years. So but if you break it down into the way data is captured, usually automatically, and then the modeling process where you're trying to take data which doesn't have intelligence and make it, to give it knowledge, information, like similar to what was happening with geographic information systems, so that objects then can be interacted with by users, etc. And then finally, the last part is all about game engines, where very much like a combination of a film and a book, but it's web-based, and you can interact with in whatever way it has been designed by both the modelers and then the people who will tell the story or give the information. So this, you know, so there's three aspects to it. First is the type of software for collecting data. The second is the modeling, and the third then is very much the game engine. So whatever you like to use, whatever does the job, no preference, except that 2D graphic AutoCAD, if it's not 3D, it doesn't really work, you know, but it's useful for its surveys, etc. Okay, so I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I think this was a very clear answer. So we have two related questions, again, maybe addressed to Maurice or to another speaker also. From Beshar Oktay, is there any possible way to replace site experience in distance learning education? For example, measurements, defining the material, and structural damages. And, the other one is measuring and survey are initial tools which we use in the conservation of cultural heritage. Digital technologies have been developed for this initial stage, but how about analysis of materials like laboratory works and treatment, intervention like site works on site? And how do we teach them within distance learning? This is a question from us.
Okay, well, will I take
maybe you can start, Maurice?
Yeah, I'll just start. Maybe this is where it's worth a discussion. So, right, and the confusing thing here is that, you know, you're going to learn two things. One, you're going to learn the tools and the processes for working with digital recording and modeling and presentation. So you have to learn how to do that at the level that you require, not everything. You don't need to learn everything, or depends on who you are. And secondly, then the products of the data collection, modeling, and knowledge enhanced digital objects, buildings, etc., can be used as learning tools for students. So there's two aspects to it. Very much we're in the sort of early days where we've recorded a lot, we've built a lot of digital models, and you can find on the website that I put up from for the European program, where they have a whole collection of buildings, objects, etc. These can be used for education purposes, but in terms of more sophisticated interactions with the buildings, which can be built through game engines, etc. It's early days. There's not a lot there as yet. So, but all I can do really is say, this is how it can be done, and this is what the future can be. Now, in terms of say analysis, if you look at it, if whatever is added to the digital object, it can carry out that function. So anything from, say, straightforward production of documentation for historic buildings right through to analysis like what is described as structural analysis, FEA, etc. This can be done by the machine, by the computer, because the bottom line is that what you've collected is a series of machine numbers, and it can take the form of visualization, or it can take the form of measurement or energy analysis. So it's very much to do with what has been enhanced on the object of the building in terms of what you want to do with it later. So, and then it depends on the skills of the people. If they can't use the software, it very much means that you have to build these interactive models using game engines, or else you're just left with a visualization tool. So I hope again that maybe someone else could come in here. As a person who works with the technology all the time, you can see I have a bias towards the technology.
Can I maybe come in? I mean, I'm not an educator, so I'm not speaking from an academic position, but I do think, I mean, it's a very broad question because it might depend on what subject we're talking about, and if I'm looking at it as a practitioner, as a skilled craftsman, for example, I have to learn how to do it on site. I have to practice the repair technique. If I'm learning to be a surveyor and doing some of the technology Maurice is talking about, then really the world I am going into is a digital world. If I am who I am, which is an architect, which is transcending maybe some of these, I do believe that there's some fundamentals that are essential, and this is the difficulty for so many courses, is that the fundamentals don't change really, but all of this new possibilities are growing and the complexities are deepening, and it's becoming increasingly essential to have competence or awareness or some level of understanding in all of these. I think the challenge for educators is at what stage is that introduced into the students' training and life, and then is it a fundamental at undergraduate? Is it something that is postgraduate? Is it something that's part of lifelong professional learning? Is it a part of specialism? And then I think it's then how do all of those different specialists work together? In my view, this is where ICOMOS and CIF maybe has a role, which is understanding the framework within which cultural heritage is protected and enhanced and communicated, which is growing. And I think there's a real dilemma for academic institutions, because I think there are commercial pressures now to move to an online world, distant learning, because it's easier and it's cheaper. It's not just COVID. COVID is a launching pad. I think it's really important that bodies like CIF and ICOMOS have this discussion. What is fundamental, and can you import, like Professor Aman is said, the difficulty, the really interesting projects you described, but somehow the output that the students created was affected by the fact that they couldn't visit the sites and engage with them. That's really fundamental, I suppose, for, you know, the question is that something that must be part of at some stage, or is there a way in which it can be overcome? Are there some courses that purely educate through distant? Are there others that deliver it another way? So there's lots of questions, but maybe for ICOMOS, we might try and agree what's fundamental.
I would like to add also the meeting with people. I mean, whenever we go to a site with some, whether it's a monument or whether it's a quarter, a historic quarter in the city, I mean, without talking to the people, without knowing in intimacy the relationship of the community to the site, it would be, the documentation would be only technical. Of course, we can overcome technical documentation, but I think it's essential. And that's why I don't see any other substitute than by going and meeting the people on the site.
Thank you very much. So this was also an answer for Catriona Burns' question. I think, how can this technology be used to substitute for usual conservation education? And another related topic is the touch, like Amnon mentioned just a minute ago. Yes. So from Virgin Altons, a question. When it comes to understanding the building in terms of materials and fabric in working with digital technologies, do we lose the touch, if you like? It is a major feat for our conservation sensibilities. And also Alessandro Chemis asked the same question, do we lose the touch? I guess it depends mostly on what you do once you have a digital survey in your hands. I mean, a common question. So maybe we can discuss a little bit more about this. Amnon, maybe you would like to continue, or Paul, maybe you have...
I think, of course, my presentation was not the usual presentation of conservation teacher or researcher. I was not dealing this time with materials, with construction, and with I meant to present you the actual issues that are interesting me now, but not only me. I mean the whole society around me. And this pandemic that came right to all of us, but in our situation, things became much worse. And you could see it through the students' reaction. And it was very, very frustrating to try to help them through Zoom. And well, they not only, the site was only a way to approach their own problems. I mean, and we in Israel, we do have problems. I won't go on with it, but as I said before, the question whether we have another paradigm to then going to the site and touch the site and touch the stones and know them much better, and of course talking to the people. This is, I don't see any other solution and any other alternative. Of course, all the archive documentation and all the historic documentation, this has been done even before the pandemic times. So it has been done in, in remote. I mean, we can go into all our archives from home and we can collect the materials. But this is far than enough. I mean, it's not enough. I mean, that's why most of the project I felt lost their authenticity, because there is no authentic treatment without really authentic touch and authentic understanding of the sense of the place, not only the materials. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, this answers, this is related with the comments and another good answer.
Perhaps, sorry.
Paul, we can continue with you. Yes.
Just very briefly, I think what saying is, you know, very much following in the ICOMOS line in terms of authenticity. And, you know, it's a very, you know, it's a treasured principle of ICOMOS and conservation of cultural heritage. And I think in a way, it's not that I mean, the role that now digital transformation or the new tools and techniques that are available, they're still basically documentation tools. They're not actually a tool that you know can physically address issues. And as I think we all know that, you know, every time we're faced with a conservation challenge, it must be looked at with the type of fresh eyes that Amnon and Grainne are approaching the broad topic of what's the purpose of the exercise. And ultimately, it's protecting the integrity of the site or the monument or the building. Ultimately, that's what it's doing. And so it's not saying that the type of documentation that is produced now digitally isn't invaluable. And it's obviously, in terms of archiving and having access to material, it's obviously of great value. But whether the profiles or the skills that are required there, I mean, that's why the multidisciplinary aspect of conservation is so important, because obviously architectural historians, there's lots of bodies that can benefit immensely from this type of storage and retrieval methods, and then applying them, as Maurice has shown, to the 3D or the way buildings now can be surveyed and the survey material can be accessed. And this is where I do come down to, because what I saw in the craft college was that the digital survey, or the BIM, or whatever we call it, that language is now spreading throughout. It's throughout the modern construction industry, but it's also spreading within the conservation sector. But it hasn't settled yet. I don't think we're quite clear as to how it's settled. And I think the dialogue is very, very important, rather than, it would be very wrong to say it's of no benefit. That would, I believe, that would be a very wrong starting point. But I think what each discipline and each profile needs to do is to specifically say where they see it as of use or of benefit to their profile or their discipline.
Very briefly, it's not either or, it's probably both. But I think the other challenge is that a lot of the technology, because it is still evolving, I think Maurice would agree, it's still, like the work that you presented, Maurice, as you said, was primarily commissioned by the state. So it's not really affordable or accessible for many smaller practices who often are working within conservation work. So it will be, it's emerging, and even in commercial practice, you know, it has encountered legal challenges and all kinds of issues. So I think we won't make a definitive decision or judgment on it now, because it is itself evolving.
Yeah, if I can say something, sorry, because I'm slightly concerned of time. I think we need to bring it to a close because we had 80 something and people is coming down before the people abandon us. I think we should bring it to a close. But just as educator, I just wanted to make some points. And also I'm the president of ICOMOS-CIF, and Paul is one of the vice president. And just for you to see how hopefully the Bureau represents a variety of views, because I disagree with some of the things that Paul said. And I think, you know, we have to really be contemporary. And it's not just the documentation. We have moved from that, actually. We are going now into making use of this data we are getting, and the point clouds are getting cracked. So there is a lot of new developments. And I think we have to make everybody aware of that, and we have to work, I think, together, not to lose what we do this for, which I think is the fundamental thing. So at the end, what we want to do is to conserve the best we can these buildings and sites. But we have to really make use of technology, because I think there is a real problem in some instances, a cultural problem, not wanting to use new technologies by principle. In a Ruskinian way, you know about Ruskin, no? John Ruskin didn't want to travel by train or any machine, or even his books. So he went to Italy, and all the books have to be carried in carriages. And I always found that quite fascinating, because, you know, I think we all are living from what he thought and his ideas, and we are still carrying on from there. But I think that aspect I will not agree with him, and where other times, of course. But I think what makes me think is, I think we need more debate on this. So I think it's, I think this should open future debate about, because I think there is a real problem in the field, people with technology against, so, and what we do with these technologies. And I sit in the RIB assessors panel, and we discuss that as well. We get these beautiful point clouds, but then we cannot do really anything with them, and we end up doing elevations out of that as we can. But I think that's just, it's question of time. And even in small practices, I really sympathetic with that, because I think, you know, we have to do the high technology to at the end bring it to really low tech stuff. But for that, you have to do the high tech as well in order to make things available for people. So sorry to come in, but I thought, because, you know, for the benefit of the audience, just to have a bit of variety of view, maybe. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers, and we collected a lot of data for further debates. So I think the floor is yours again, Nurdan, for closing the session.
Thank you very much. I take the floor back for conclusion. As a result of the discussions, we may conclude that we need to consider including new technologies, possibly digital ones, in our capacity building activities. Definitely not to replace site experience, but to enrich the content with contemporary methods and to ease accessibility during times of crisis. As a second point, we need to search for methods to utilize capacity building activities of cultural heritage as a tool for dealing with the aftermath of disasters and crises, because cultural heritage is a shared source of resilience, sustainability, and solidarity among communities. And as a third point, we may consider a hidden advantage of distance learning through online collaboration at international, regional, and local levels. Under lockdown, we were forced to stay home, where we had the time and the need to interact with colleagues from all over the world to share their experiences. This proves that we need stronger bonds to communicate and to collaborate with each other. I would like to conclude by presenting my gratitude to all the presenters for their valuable contributions to the discussion. I would also like to thank all who have made this event possible: the former and the current Bureau of ICOMOS International Training Committee and Turkish National Committee of ICOMOS. And this event would not have been possible without Cristina Gonzalez Longo, who has taken the lead in this initiative, Ebru Omay, my dear partner in crime, and Aylin Akçabozan from ICOMOS-Turkey, who has supported us with the posters. Also, we would like to thank each member of the audience for participating and joining in the discussion. Please keep in touch with CIF, as we will continue to work on the subject. We wish you productive days of happiness and health. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.